So welcome back to our rolling crash course. My name is Jim Schultz, and our mission today continues forward. Back in episode number 1, we laid out some rolling basics, right? Laid down the fundamentals to understand what rolling is, what we're trying to do, and familiarize ourselves with some of the terminology. Here in episode number 2, we're going to talk specifically about rolling defined risk strategies. So this is what gets everybody excited. Your verticals, your iron condors, your diagonals, etc. So without further ado, let's do it, man. Let's dive into episode number 2 of the rolling crash course, rolling defined risk strategies. All right, so before we get into any specifics, here is the most important thing that you need to pull away from this entire episode. Maybe one of the most important things you need to pull away from the entire crash course. Whenever you roll a defined risk strategy, you need to make sure that you do so for a credit. This needs to be adhered to 98% of the time. Now, why isn't it 100% of the time? Well, more on that in a later episode, but this is so important. Let's break it down why it's so important. So why is it so important that you roll your defined risk strategies for credits? Well, it's pretty simple. Doing this ensures that you reduce your risk. Suppose, for example, you have a 195 short put spread in Disney that you sold for $1.80. At trade entry, your total risk in the trade is $3.20, and that total risk is capped regardless of what might happen to the price of Disney. I mean, it could fall to zero, and that risk would still be the same. Now, suppose some time goes by and the trade isn't quite working, but you can roll it out at the same strikes to the next cycle for a 15-cent credit. It's not a huge difference, but look how that changes your risk-return dynamics. You've now collected a total of $1.95 on that same $5 wide spread. This means your total risk has dropped from $3.20 to $3.05, all because you rolled for a credit. Suppose instead you had to pay a debit of 10 cents to roll. Now your profit potential has fallen, your total risk has risen. This is not what you want for a defined risk strategy. All right, so rolling for a credit might sound too good to be true. Well, it's not, if you can do it. The reality is a lot of times you will have to pay a debit to roll a defined risk strategy, which, as we've just seen, increases your risk. To further illustrate how all of this works together, let's start working through some of the more popular defined risk strategies that we use at tastytrade, and let's start with maybe the granddaddy of them all in the defined risk strategy genre, the vertical spread. So vertical spreads are fairly straightforward. If the trade is working, so a short vertical spread is out of the money or a long vertical spread is in the money, you should be able to close the trade for some kind of profit, which is usually preferred at that time over rolling. Now, what if the trade is kind of in the middle? So it's not really working, but it's also not really not working. That's where you can usually roll for a credit. If the trade isn't working, so the short vertical spread is in the money or the long vertical spread is out of the money, this is where you'll likely have to pay a debit to roll the strategy. So that is a no-go. Now, you might be wondering, Jim, how does that work? Like, why is it a debit when it's not working? Well, without even getting into the mathematics or even taking a really, really close look at what's going on, we can actually zoom out and take a much easier approach. The answer is really straightforward. If the trade isn't working, whether it's a short vertical spread or a long vertical spread, it doesn't matter. If you want more time on the trade, you have to pay for that. You have to assume more risk. Because think about it, if you didn't, if it was a credit, then we would never have to take any losing trades ever, which obviously can't be the case. All right, so that's all you really need to know when it comes to rolling vertical spreads, whether they're short or long, it doesn't really matter. Let's now move into an iron condor, which is going to be a pretty simple transition because an iron condor is just 2 vertical spreads. So with an iron condor, when it comes to rolling out, we want to view it very much the same as a vertical, which makes sense because, again, it is comprised of 2 verticals. If both spreads are out of the money, so the stock is between your 2 short strikes, then rather than roll, just take the trade off with whatever profit you might have. Now, if you don't have a profit at that time, which certainly does happen with iron condors, then you probably just need more time. But what happens when one side goes in the money? Well, here your roll is going to have two parts. You're going to have the tested side, that's going to be a debit to roll. You're going to have the untested side, that's going to be a credit to roll. So, what you're going to want to do is net them together to see if your net is a credit or a debit. If it's a net credit, then go ahead and roll it out. If it's a net debit, then pass. And by pass, I mean sit on the trade and hold it longer, giving it a chance to come back. Again, duration over direction. All right, so those are some iron condor roll basics. Now, I actually have more to say about iron condors, but I'm going to save that for episode number 5 on the FAQs because there are some specific questions that I am asked on a very regular basis when it comes to iron condors and rolling. And so I'm going to put that information in that segment. But let's now turn our attention to the last example that we're going to work through here in this episode. Let's dig into some diagonals, which are quite unique because of the way that they are structured. So with diagonal spreads at tastytrade, we buy an in-the-money option in the back month, and we sell an out-of-the-money option in the front month. And the idea is, if the stock moves in our favor, so this would be higher for a call diagonal or lower for a put diagonal, then we'll just take it off for a winner and be done with it. But what happens if the stock moves against us? The way this strategy is set up is we have a built-in roll ready to go. That front month short is going to expire worthless. So we're going to be able to reload again in another expiration. Now this second expiration, it could be a weekly option that expires before you're long. It could be the same expiration as you're long, thus creating a vertical spread. That would also be fine. You can do this at the same strike, or you can even choose a different strike, which would usually be a closer strike. And the best part is you're always going to be able to do this for a credit. It will always be a credit because you're just adding another new short option to the mix, and short options alone are always credits. Now, how do you choose? The same strike or a different strike, a closer strike? Well, the same strike is nice because your spread width will be the same, so the credit you collect just reduces your overall risk and boosts your profit potential, similar to a vertical spread. But you could also consider a closer strike, which will bring in more credit, but it will also shrink the spread width and reduce your overall profit potential. I would only consider this if the stock has really moved against you and you want to aggressively take risk off the table. Wow, man, and just like that, we are done. Everything you ever wanted to know about rolling defined risk strategies. Now, some of you out there might be thinking, Jim, that was not everything I ever wanted to know, because I still have some questions. Like, what do I do about rolling the untested side of an iron condor? What do I do at 21 days to go? Hey, those are outstanding questions. They're so outstanding, in fact, that I've placed them in a special episode, episode number 5, the FAQ. So definitely stay tuned and hang around until you get to that one. We're going to cover all that and more in that episode. But either way, man, episode number 2 is in the books. Don't forget, guys, you can always email me, jschultz on Twitter at jschultzf3. If you have any questions whatsoever, it is my absolute pleasure to help in any way that I possibly can. But I will see you guys in episode number 3, where things really get exciting with rolling undefined risk strategies. So I will see you there.